Do you remember in Futurama how New York is built on top of the remnants of New York? And it was like, man, this is wild. How could this ever happen? Now, what if I told you that this has been happening for hundreds, if not thousands of years? This one's for all the boys out there, because now the cat's out of the bag. All men do is drink cold beer and think about the Roman Empire. So this week, while I was drinking a beer, I had Rome on the Dome. And I remember this one time I walked into a Roman church and descended deep into the earth like I was Nick Cage with the Declaration of Independence. As we went down those steps beneath the street level of Rome, it really did start to amaze me just how much of this city is built on nothing but pillars and rubble. What was probably explained to me while I wasn't paying attention because I was too busy thinking about if my Simpsons Tapped Out building had finished was why they even did this in the first place. Italy is a pretty big country, and yeah, even though it's really cool to live super close to the city, surely there's some really nice towns you could move to further out. So instead of paying $3,000 round trip to fly there and hear this guy tell me the same things he told me 10 years ago, I thought I'd save us all a little bit of time and money. So instead, we're just gonna Google this stuff. In the last few decades, there have been archaeological discoveries which show some kind of evidence that humans have been in the general area of Rome for the last 14,000 years. That is so long ago that if your relatives was one of the first people who lived in Rome, they'd be dead. You would also have to say great 465 times before adding on that they're your grandpa or ma. There are tools, pottery, and weapons that have been discovered that show even on the low end, humans have been around the Rome area for the last 10,000 years. Since then, there's been many different civilizations that have come through the area, including, and again, this one's for the boys, the Roman Empire. Real quick, this trend is just, it's so real. How can you not think about the Roman Empire? I'm sorry, how does that not come up at least once a month? I agree with the once a month guys. They did so much for us. They made sewage. They made it so I can do a shit, and then it just goes away, and I don't have to think about it. I don't have to pour it out my window on some poor person walking past the window. How do you not think about it? And let alone, let boys be boys. Have you seen what the Roman army looks like? That shit was sick. The point is, the ground level of Rome has been rising for centuries. We got there, we got back. A major factor for this is because of Tiber River, which runs through basically the middle of the city. The river starts in Balze, spelt B-A-L-Z-E, real place, look it up, and flows into the Tyrrhenian Sea. The Tiber River now has retaining walls which were built in the late 1800s, but before this, the river was prone to overflowing, which would flood the city. But, and this is why you should always have Romans on the dome, is because the ancient Romans actually found a solution to the problem. And it wasn't through retaining walls. Again, they weren't ever built on the river until the late 1800s. The Romans worked out another way to stop the flooding, which ultimately killed two birds with one stone. And that was by having the river as part of their sewage system. Basically, around the city, there were sewage drains and public toilets, which nobody in any country except Australia has ever experienced before. In the case of the sewage drains, what they would do is that it would let any water that overflowed from the river down into what was called a castellum. In the castellum, the water would then go through pipes and tunnels and travel further downstream of the river and would reconnect with it, effectively stopping most of the flooding that plagued Rome for hundreds of years. This to me is so wild to think about, because also as part of this, piss and shit would also be taken out of the city. We didn't have this in modern civilization for centuries later. The arguably most advanced society and country of its time, England, was still using chamber pots, which are basically bedpans or training toilets for toddlers, until the mid-1800s, and these Romans figured out a better system for this centuries before them. Once the Roman Empire fell, the sewage system stopped working, and the flooding started to become a problem again. This is because with the flooding, there also comes some debris, which can include like dirt, gravel, and even things like hay that were laying around at the time. Because there was no way to stop it anymore, Rome started having the same issues pre-Roman Empire, and the ground level started rising again. And this is just one of the factors that was going against Rome for why the ground level couldn't stay the way it was. Although sewage was taken care of, regular rubbish, not so much. Instead, most places would just have landfills around town where they would dump all their garbage. So it kind of was like New York. The piles of garbage grew to be so much that it actually started to raise the height of entire neighborhoods and eventually full towns. Another factor to keep in mind for how the ground level continued to rise is also general decay. Each year, an inch of dust falls on Rome, which was a makeup of leaves, some sand from nearby beaches, and also powder coming building off of the stones used in almost every structure made in and around the city. This is something that is almost entirely out of a civilization's hands, and is something that will just happen in a place like Rome. And when your city is essentially abandoned for many years and not maintained correctly, this can lead to some problems. After the fall of the Roman Empire, it was no longer the center of any empire, so eventually people moved on. Which, when you think about it, kind of makes sense. Like, if you think of the capital of your state or county, and imagine if they just moved it somewhere else, can you imagine that everyone would still want to stay in the same place and not want to move to the new, like, central location? At the time of the Roman Empire, it is estimated that around 1 million people lived in Rome. However, after the capital was moved, it's estimated around 300,000 people remained in the city, with some even saying it was as low as 100,000. This left a lot of the Roman buildings unused for many years, leaving them to decay over time, and by the time the capital was moved back to Rome during the Art Renaissance, the buildings were outdated and a change needed to happen. Due to this, and the ground level having risen a significant amount since the peak of the empire, people's first floor of their homes quickly ended up becoming more of a basement because it was being surrounded by dirt. This got to a point where it was decided to have the old structures demolished and to build new buildings at a higher level. But they had a little bit of trouble with that. It turns out that the Romans were so good at building sturdy infrastructure, they were too difficult to be destroyed. Have to give them credit for this, man. I'm sorry. I know, oh man, thinking about Rome. Their buildings were built so well that hundreds of years later, with new technology, they could not be knocked down. And they were only building this to not be knocked down by water, and they couldn't be knocked down by tools. Credit where credit is due, come on. So without the possibility of removing a lot of these structures, it was decided that again, due to how stable these buildings were, they should be used as foundation for the buildings being built above it. Say that 10 times. This also had the added benefit of being able to keep the new buildings above where the flooding would typically max out. So these new houses were going to be much safer to live in. So they got to work. They would tear off the roofs of the Roman Empire's houses, fill the inside of it with dirt, and then start their new build on top of it without having to worry about any of the foundations because it was basically already done for them. And from here it was basically rinse and repeat. For many years after the idea was conceived, Rome became a city built on top of itself. It's kind of cool how this decision made out of necessity ended up actually preserving a lot of history. If they were able to destroy all the buildings they wanted to increase the height of Rome, we would not have moments of civilization preserved to such great detail as we do today. There's a whole heap of guided tours you're able to do in the city, which take you underground and allow you to, as lame as it sounds, walk through history. There are very few places in the world where you're able to walk through basically a time capsule. This was never the intention of the people at the time, but unknowingly, these regular, everyday workers have given every living person after them an amazing gift. Well, that's my history lesson for the week done. No homework for the weekend, unless you have not finished chapter 5 of this term's horrible history. I cannot stress that enough. We'll be moving on to chapter 6 Monday. Alright kids, stay out of trouble. Have a good weekend. Alright, Friday night. Time to get a bag and hit the pub, I reckon. Fuck, I love my 40s. Thank you all for watching Mr. Johnson's Period 4 History. That's the name of this. It's as good as anything that I've got. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe for me to once again answer the questions nobody asked. Oh, and play video games. I like doing that too. Alright, that's it from me. Join the Discord if you want to keep up with what's going on. And there'll be a poll eventually for me to do another video and you can pick the topic. I'll ask the Discord first. Those guys have more input than you do. Haha, sucked in. Alright, anyway, have a good one. I'll see you later.